this morning I'm going to carry on in the series that began last week, The Truth Shall Set You Free. And I gave you a revolutionary concept, or at least it was in Jesus' time when it was this, is that the truth is what sets you free. But you can't just leave it there because there's more to the equation. The truth will set you free, but how do you know the truth? By abiding in my word, Jesus says, and then you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And so that was my simple message last week. And then what I did was I went into a time of explaining the Protestant Reformation and how important it was because people didn't have the Word of God in their own language. And so we went and looked at a very slender snapshot of the Reformation, just a few characters. And I think the one thing we figured out was the incredible personal price that it has taken to bring to us the Word of God in our own language. And here we are today, and most people in North America have at least 4 Bibles in their house, most of them collecting dust. And the only way to really get there is to abide in that Word and abide in that truth, and then you shall know the truth. There was this woman, she was riding on a plane, and she was sitting there reading her Bible, and the guy next to her said, "So what are you reading?" She says, "I'm reading my Bible." He says, "You don't believe that thing, do you?" She says, "I believe every word." He says, "How about that story of Jonah? I mean, getting swallowed by a fish. Do you believe that story?" She says, "Yeah, I believe that story." He says, "Answer me this. How was it that he was able to live for 3 days in the belly of a fish? Answer that." She says, "I don't know, but when I get to heaven, I'll ask him." He says, "Well, what if he didn't make it to heaven?" She says, "Fine, then you can ask him." Yeah, that's cheeky, no doubt. So we're going to go right back to our text that we read last week, and I'm going to pull another piece out of it for us. And so we're picking it up in John chapter 8, verse 31. It says this, "Then Jesus said to the Jews who believed, 'If you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free.' They answered him, 'We are Abraham's descendants and have never been in bondage to anyone. How can you say you will make us free?' Jesus answered them, 'Most assuredly I say to you, whoever commits sin is a slave to sin. And a slave does not abide in the house forever, but a son abides forever. Therefore, if the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed.'" My one singular thought last week was this, that the truth will set us free, but we live in a world that no longer regards and esteems truth. And that's what we talked about, the post-truth era that we now live in, where people don't really care that much about the truth. They're more interested in how they feel about something. And so we talked about that and how it was important for us to abide in the Word so we would actually know the truth. So today I have another singular thought, and I'm going to be attempting to answer this question. What is true freedom? Because let me tell you something, our world thinks freedom is completely the opposite of what Jesus thinks freedom is. See, Jesus said that if you commit sin, you're a slave to sin. That sounds like bondage, not freedom, right? Yet what does our world think? Our world believes that freedom is to be able to do whatever you want and commit whatever sins you want whenever you want. I mean, how many times have you heard this? "It's a free country. I can do what I want. I can smoke as much pot as I want, watch as much porn as I want. I can play my music as loud as I want. It's a free country." Well, you know, how many of you have noticed that the only time people mention that it's a free country is when they're doing something sinful or stupid? Have you noticed that? That's the time when we invoke it's a free country, because we know that there's something usually offensive about what we're doing. I want to tell you a little story today. I hope you're not getting sick of my Chevy Chase European vacation stories, because I have one more for you. And so this summer, as we were traveling from Germany into the Czech Republic, and we got on a bus, and we got a brand new tour guide, and his name was Tomas. And as we were traveling the 2.5 hours to Prague, he was telling us about the history and the culture of Prague, and it was fascinating. He was trying to orient us so that when we got into the city of Prague, we would know a little bit about the country. And so as we were traveling, he says, "There's something I want to tell you that might be a surprise to some of you sort of sensible people from the West. And that is this, is that the Czech public are very, very free. And what I mean by that is they believe they should be allowed to do whatever they want. And the explanation for this was that they had 41 years of communist rule. And when they were under communist rule, they were highly oppressed. And when they got their freedom, when the Iron Curtain fell in 1989, they actually began to express their freedom in sort of in extraordinary and sometimes extreme ways. And isn't that sort of the truth? When we kind of fall into a bondage of something, or something's really extreme this way, and then we come out of it, we swing right by normality into another extreme over here. And so he was explaining to us, you know what he's really doing? He was warning us as to some of the things that we were going to see. He says, you might see people doing things or looking a certain way on the street, and you might not understand it, and you might be offended by it. He was appealing to our North American sensibilities. And he says, I just want you to know that in the Czech Republic, you can do whatever you want. And so, you know, to tell you the truth, in the days that we were there, I didn't see anything there that I haven't seen in Osborne Village in Winnipeg. So, you know, to me, it wasn't that extreme. But nevertheless, he told us one really interesting story. He said, to give you an example of what I'm talking about, one day this woman, a young woman, decided that she was going to start riding the bus completely naked. And so every day she got on the bus, and every day she rode around all day on the bus completely naked. And he said, that's what our country's like. We are a free country, and people can do whatever they want. And if you want to ride around naked on the bus, you can ride around naked on the bus. And so no one ever arrested her. She didn't get accused of indecent exposure. He said, however, her particular bus route became very popular with the men. and he said there was huge lineups at the bus stop to get on that bus, and scuffles and fights broke out because they were trying to get onto this overcrowded bus. And I thought about that sort of bizarre story, and I thought that's what happens. Anytime we take something to an extreme, what happens? We fall into consequences that are the result. And I want to let you in on a little secret today that not everybody understands, and it's this. Satan's desire is to put us into bondage. You know that. And we often think that he does that by brute force, but it's actually the opposite. Most of the time, what Satan does is he entices us with the titillation of sin and the pleasures of this world. And I'll prove it to you from the very first story of the very first fall. And we talked about this last week. So we have Adam and Eve. They're put in the garden. They're told not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God says, in the day you eat it, you shall surely die. Satan comes along and he says, you will not die. You will be like God, knowing both good and evil. I want to read you what happens next. Now, listen carefully to this verse. It's verse 6 in Genesis chapter 3. And it says, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, say good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, say pleasant to the eyes, and the tree desirable to make one wise, say desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she gave to her husband with her, and he ate also. Now, did you notice those things? The temptation was this. It looked good for food, it looked pleasant to the eyes, and desirable to make one wise. Is there anything, just if you take those three things, is there anything wrong with those three things? I mean, something that looks good for food or pleasant to the eyes or desirable to make one wise, there's nothing wrong with that. Here's the problem, is that it was still forbidden. And God knew that if they ate of that fruit, there would be consequences that they had no idea were coming as a result. But he appealed to the senses of the fact that it was good for food, pleasant to the eyes, desirable to make one wise. Nothing wrong with that, except what they desired was forbidden. And that's how all sin works. It always looks appealing. Do you think Satan didn't tempt them with a ball and chain and say, let me put this ball and chain around your neck, you really like it. No, he brought them something. He dangled something that was appealing to them. That's how sin works with us. Now, I want to show you something, because John the Apostle in 1 John, he actually comments on this, and I want you to listen carefully and see if you can see the reflection here. 1 John chapter 2, verse 16, it says this, for all that is in this world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but of the world. Did you catch that? All that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, good for food, the lust of the eyes, pleasant to the eyes, and the pride of life, desirable to make one wise. See, all the temptations that are in this world are all very appealing things to us. Things that appeal to our flesh, to our eyes, to our sense of accomplishment in this world. And so that's the trick that Satan uses. And let me give you another piece of this puzzle in case you've missed it. Most of the sins, maybe not every one of them, but most of the sins that exist in the world are actually corruptions of something good. I mean, God creates something good, Satan comes and twists it around or takes it to an excess, and all of a sudden something that was good becomes something evil, right? I mean, think about it. Love becomes lust. Prosperity becomes greed. Abundance becomes gluttony. Pleasure becomes hedonism. The list goes on and on and on and on. Let me give you an example today. I'm going to go where angels fear to tread. I'm going to make you super uncomfortable, and I'm going to talk about sex. Let me start by saying this. Sex is good. Amen. So we have one, I get one amen out of the whole room from the newlywed. Just for reference, okay? Let me say it again. Sex is good. Sex was God's idea. You do know this, don't you? Sex was God's idea. He invented it. It was something good. It was something he created for the man and the woman. It says that he took them and put them in the garden, and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and it was good. So sex was good within the confines of a marriage. Now, here's what I want you to think about. You know that the command to be fruitful and multiply is the first commandment? It's the mankind first commandment. We're nailing it. We are nailing this. This is like the only one we haven't broken. We are doing so well of being fruitful and multiplying and filling the earth, and there's 7 billion of us because we're keeping God's commands. Well, at least part of it, because what he did was he told us that this thing called sex, which is the most beautiful and intimate thing that a man and a woman can share together, and it does lead to children. I don't know if you know that, but it actually leads to children, but that's not the purpose. It's not the only purpose. If it was only about procreation, then he would never have written the Song of Solomon. And if you've never read the Song of Solomon, go and be prepared to blush, because he says some pretty extraordinary things there about sexuality. So God created sexuality to bring a man and a woman together in a kind of intimacy that there is really no other comparison on this earth. But here is the thing. He intended it for the exclusive domain of a man married to a woman. And in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4, it says this. It says that marriage is honorable in all, the bed is undefiled. So what he was saying, in other words, is this. He's saying sex within marriage is not sinful. And what happens in that marriage bed is actually something sacred, not sinful. And that's what God created it for. And if it's in the right and a proper place, it is honorable in all, and it is undefiled. Do you know what the very next part of the same verse says? But it says, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. What was he saying? He was saying that sex is good as long as it's in marriage, and as soon as it crosses that line and goes outside of the marriage of a man and a woman, then what happens is it becomes either fornication or adultery, premarital or extramarital sex, and as soon as that is in that place, it is now sin. And not only is it sin, but he says he will judge us for it. And so we live in this world, and I think you'll probably agree, that's become completely sex-crazed. Don't you think? I mean, you look at our world, there's sexuality everywhere you turn. It's unbelievable. You cannot turn on the television today without being bombarded. You're afraid to watch television at 5 o'clock at night with your kids because you don't know what's going to come on, the kind of things that they're going to see and the kind of things you're going to have to explain. And then we are being bombarded from every side with an internet with 2 billion pages of pornography on the internet. And then we wonder if our kids are safe. Your kids are not safe. Let me tell you a really embarrassing story. So my daughter, she's about 20. She was in university. She was studying for something. She was sitting at the computer. And we have the great big screen in our family room. And she's sitting at the computer, and she was talking about something. I said, oh, I just read an article on that. And I said, you know, why don't you go to this article? And she says, well, what were the words? And I'll search it. I said, no, you don't have to search it. I remember the website. And I said, just type in blankblank.com. Unfortunately, it's not blankblank.com, just in case you're wondering. It was something else. And I can't even remember what it was. But unfortunately, when I told her the website, I was one letter off on what it really was. And she hit the enter button, and boom, the most disgusting pornographic page you could ever imagine came up in this big screen right in front of me and my daughter. We both screamed in horror. She went, ah! I went, ah! And she closed the page, and then she looked at me, and she said, Pop, that might have been your worst parenting moment ever. I said, it's definitely up there. And she's still, I mean, can you imagine you and your daughter sitting there and being exposed to that? And with no fault of our own, we literally stumbled into it. And that's the world we live in. We live in this world that has absolutely gone crazy about sex. And then we have the poster boys, you know, the Bill Cosbys and the Harvey Weinsteins, and we go, oh, they've gone too far. Are we surprised they've gone too far? Can we create this hypersexual culture and not be surprised that there's this kind of abuse and this kind of wanton sexuality? And then these guys go, what did I do wrong? They don't even understand they did something wrong. You know why? Because that's the world we live in, this world that is so rampantly sexually sinful. And we as Christians, we're caught in the middle of it. Now, I want to tell you a story that's going to kind of explain how this works, this whole sin thing and sexuality thing, and you have to relate it to other things. But it's the story of Samson. And Samson is really an interesting story with a lot of helpful details in it. So first of all, let me explain something about Samson. You know, we know that he had this long hair, and as long as he didn't cut his hair, he had this actually supernatural strength. And what we sometimes think is we think that Samson, we don't know that he said that if his hair was cut, he would be as weak as any other man. So I know how you imagine Samson. You imagine Samson looking something like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson with long hair, right? I mean, like from the Scorpion King. I mean, that's how I imagine him, because I read the children's Bible, and that's what, you know, he kind of looks like in the children's Bible, in the pictures, as he's wrestling lions and doing these sorts of things, long flowing hair. But I want you to know something. I don't believe that that's what he looked like. Because if it said that he was as weak as any man, if he lost his hair, then it wasn't natural strength. So I think he looked more like David Spade's Joe Dirt, is what I think he looked like. And I think he was a skinny guy, long hair. I'm imagining Samson with a mullet. I don't know how you're imagining him. So in other words, what I'm saying is that Samson in reality probably looked a whole lot more like Pastor Keith than Pastor Mark, right? What, you think I'm joking? You have any idea how skinny that guy is? You know what his wife Susan told me? She said that if he doesn't tie his legs in knots in the morning, he doesn't have knees for the rest of the day. They don't know whether to laugh or feel sorry for it. Keith knew this was coming. Don't worry about him. This is rehearsed, people. We do this in rehearsal. You know, it's like a talk show, you know, you rehearse these things. That's not true. But he actually is still okay with it. And I just try and give you a little picture of this. So understand this, the story of Samson is not some story about a hippie bodybuilder. He actually was the judge of Israel. And you know what that means? That means that he was the ruler of all of Israel. He was an important man. But he was such a mess up, it's hard to believe. Because when you look at his life, and I don't want you to miss this part of the story, he actually was married. So you can go read it. He was married through his own fault, no one else's fault. He messed up his marriage. But don't forget that he's a married man here as I'm telling this story. So here's what he does. He's the ruler of Israel. He's got this strength. I mean, he's trouncing these Philistines. And this is what he does. Judges chapter 16, he goes down to the city of Gaza, which is the city of the Philistines, and he sleeps with a prostitute. Now, of course, when the Philistines found out that he was in their city, imagine that, going right into their city, right? Talk about nervy. And when they found that out, they surrounded this city, and they were going to capture him on the way out. And they were really afraid of Samson, because Samson's strength, as I said, was supernatural. It says that he slew 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass. Whereas one guy, he got tongue-tied when he was preaching this, and he said, and Samson slew 1,000 Philistines with an ass bone of a donkey. And so I wouldn't say that. That's just wrong. But this guy did. And so anyway, he was this really powerful, strong, and extraordinary man when the Spirit of God came upon him. So he spends the night with this prostitute, finds out that the city is surrounded by the Philistines. So he lays low till midnight. And at midnight, he walks to the front gate of the city. And he grabs the gate and he pulls it right out of the ground, iron bar and all. And he carries it up the hill and deposits it on the top of Mount Hebron. Talk about gall and nerve. This guy had it. But here's what I don't want you to miss about this. See, the strength that he had when the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. He just had spent the night with the prostitute, and yet the strength of the Spirit of God still came upon him. So in Samson's little mind, think about this, he made the assumption that he just got away with it. See, here's what we need to understand, is that all sin has consequences. And if a sin becomes habitual, then it leads to bondage. And that's what ultimately destroys us. But here's the good news. You say, why didn't God take him down when he committed sin? The same reason God doesn't take down you first time you commit a sin. How would you like it? Let me ask the question this way. How many of you would not be here if God struck you down the first time you sinned? Any hands here? Oh, so actually nobody would be here, right? I mean, thank God God doesn't do that, right? Thank God that he has grace and mercy, and that's why he says, if any of you transgress, we have an advocate in Jesus. If you confess your sin, he is faithful and just to forgive your sin and cleanse you from all unrighteousness. How many like that promise? So it's so fantastic that we have the ability to go to Jesus when we mess up, and he will take away the sin, and he will take away, most of the time, the consequences, unless you've really got something going on, right? But you get my picture here, is that Jesus forgives us. So the same way he forgives us is the same way the Lord forgave Samson, and he had messed up that night, and the Spirit of God still came upon him. But here's what happens. He thinks, so I got away with that. I slept with a prostitute, but I'm still okay, and I still have my strength. And so God obviously didn't really mind, and he winked at my sin, and I can just carry on. So you continue on reading the story, and we find out that he takes up with another prostitute, and this one's name is Delilah. But Delilah is a little more sinister because she's working for the Philistines, and she has a plan to find out what the secret of his strength is and to bring him down. And so he sort of falls head over heels over Delilah. That's the way the story plays as far as I'm concerned. And so there they are together, and she says, what is the secret of your strength? And he says, well, if you tie me with fresh bowstrings, I'll be as weak as any other man. He wakes up in the morning, guess what? He's tied with fresh bowstrings. And she says, the Philistines are upon you. He tears off the bowstrings, has a good laugh about it, right? So then the next night, she's still whining, and she says, you didn't give me the secret of your strength. You tricked me. And so he says, okay, it has to be new ropes. It's not actually new bowstrings, it's new ropes. If you tie me with new ropes, I'll be as weak as any man. He wakes up in the morning, guess what? He's tied up with new ropes. The Philistines are upon you. He breaks the ropes, has a good laugh about it. The third night, she's at him again. And he says, well, that wasn't true, but if you weave my hair into a loom, then I'll be as weak as any other man. And guess what? He wakes up in the morning, his hair is in a loom. I'm wondering if you're following this. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 3 times, you're Samson. You're not too bright. And so that's not the end of it. Now, don't miss this, that he's actually getting closer and closer each time to what the real issue is. And the real issue is his hair, and he's already at his hair. And so finally, on the 4th time, he admits that if his hair was cut, he would be as weak as any other man. So he wakes up the next day, guess what? She shaved off all his hair. The Philistines are upon you, Samson. They come in, they capture him, they pluck out his eyes, and they imprison him. He was blinded, in prison, and in bondage. See, that's what happens. See, sin doesn't happen overnight. The habitual sin, it's the habitual sin of the fact that we move on and we carry on and we move on and we think we're getting away with it because God is gracious, but each time we're moving down that slippery slope, and eventually what happens is we bear the full consequences of that sin, which is bondage, which Jesus said anyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. And I think we can all agree that Samson became a slave to sin, and no one was to blame for his slavery other than himself. And he went onto that slippery slope. Instead of arresting himself, he kept on moving, thinking, I'm getting away with this, I'm getting away with this, and I'm getting away with this. And so when I look at our world today, I worry about a world that thinks that freedom is the ability to do whatever you want, whenever you want. It's a free country, I can do what I want. Where is that going to lead us? What is the end game going to be in a world where anything goes? And I think we have some possibilities to think about this. And I'm going to give you what I'm going to call the tale of 2 cynics. And it's about 2 books. I bet you've read either one or both of these. And the 2 books are 1984 and Brave New World. How many of you have read one of these 2 books? Or maybe both of them. And these are important books to our culture. So 1984 was written by George Orwell. Came out in 1949. He was predicting the future. And he saw a future where we would be controlled by those that would inflict pain and prevent us from having pleasure in life. So that was the world that he predicted. And those of you that know the book know the rest of the story. But 15 years before that, so in 1934, there was another book written by Aldous Huxley called Brave New World. And in Brave New World, he talked about a future where we would be controlled by giving us whatever we want. And here's what's fascinating about this story that most people don't know, is that Aldous Huxley was actually George Orwell's school teacher from Eton College. And so when Orwell wrote his book 1984, he sent a copy to his old teacher, Aldous Huxley, who wrote this other great book called Brave New World. And so he reads the book and he sends a message back to Orwell congratulating him on a well-written book and how it was an important novel. And then he said this. He said, "I'm not convinced that all this kicking and flogging people into obedience is necessary to put people into bondage." He said, "I think my version of the future is more plausible. All you have to do to enslave people is to teach them to love their servitude." And you see, that was the picture that we find in Brave New World. People allowed to do whatever they want and where that ends up going. So there's no doubt that we have had times and seasons in history where it looks more Orwellian, right? I mean, you look at the whole communist regime and the Stalinist regime, you look at North Korea, you look at some of the Arab countries, and it looks really like 1984. But if we're really honest, I mean, if here's the issue, if Orwell feared a future where what we dread will ruin us, and Huxley feared a future that which we desire will ruin us, which do we have? A Huxley or Orwell world? Which one are we living in? In the West. We're living in a Huxley world. We're living in a Brave New World. One of the things, for those of you that read the book, is that the government sponsored a drug program in Brave New World. They encouraged people to take a drug called Soma. And Soma was this thing that would make you happy. And whenever people were discouraged or depressed, the government encouraged and always had an ample supply on hand for people to have this drug, and they could take this drug and be happy. And the book says this, that it calmed and sedated, but more importantly, distracted people from the fact that they were in bondage. And so we look at this. Huxley said this. He said it had all the advantages of Christianity and alcohol with none of the defects. And he said it was the best tool for keeping a people in line because it just put them in a jacked up, dopey state, is what it was. So when I look at our world today and I see governments tripping over each other to see who's going to be next to legalize marijuana, I'm wondering what's going on in this world. Are we moving into a Brave New World? What is the motive? Why? I can't figure it out. I'm really wondering about this. What is the motive? Why do our governments want to legalize another harmful drug and make it a recreational activity for people? Could there be that there's something more sinister going on here that maybe they don't know about, but certainly we don't know about? And I'm worried about what's happening in our world. I'm worried about how people are being led by pleasure into a state of bondage. Now, you can either agree or disagree with me, but that's the thesis that I'm looking at today. Now, I want to show you a verse. It's from Revelation chapter 18, and it's really startling. And this is what it says about the future in Revelation 18, verse 23. He says, "For your merchants were great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived." And the word there, the Greek word for sorcery that the nations will be deceived with in the future is the word pharmakia. What English word do you think we have that comes from pharmakia? It's the word pharmacy or pharmacological. And here's what we know about sorcery and witchcraft in the Old Testament and in Bible times, is that the sorcerers actually used drugs. And the drugs were used to bring people into an altered state. Isn't that what narcotics do? Bring people into an altered state of reality? And could it be when people are taking hallucinogenic drugs like LSD, could it be that they're just merely looking into the spiritual world and those are the hallucinations they see? I think there's some possibility to that. And so we live in this world where people are longing for and desiring these narcotic drugs. And I have to ask myself this question. Is this what Revelation chapter 18 is talking about? Is this the kind of world we're going to live in where people are doped up and hopped up on all kinds of substances? And I want to take this a step further, and I'm going to make some of you nervous here, because I want to talk about what's happening in the world with prescription drugs. And we think, well, as long as it's a prescription drug, it's okay. How many people you know, and don't raise your hand, that are addicted to prescription drugs? And how many of us have become dependent on these things? Now, let me give you a startling statistic. Last year, there was 4.5 billion, with a B, prescriptions filled in North America. Are we really that sick? And if we're that sick, how come we're not getting any better? That's what I want to know. Why is it that we have so many drugs? Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm going to make this real clear. I know the importance of pharmaceutical drugs for saving lives. Like, let me ask you this. How many of you in this room would be dead, would not be here today if it weren't for some life-saving drug that spared your life? How many? Look at all the lives, all the hands around this room. There's quite a few people that they know. And there's probably more than that, and you just don't know it because you had penicillin when you were a kid, and whatever you had didn't proceed into something else and kill you. And so there's a lot of us that are here today because of drugs. I have family members that would be dead next week if they didn't have their medications that they live on. And you know what? There's nothing you can do about that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that what we do is we run to a medicine cabinet full of drugs, and so many of us are becoming dependent on drugs, I would say, unnecessarily. So I'm going to finish with a story about this. And here's the story. So a year and a half ago, I lost my voice, or I was losing my voice. And I was getting kind of worried about it because every week it was a little bit worse. And every week I would stand up here and I would preach, and I'd have to push it harder and harder in order for words to actually come out of my mouth. You probably didn't notice. You probably just thought I was getting angry, and because I was having to push my voice louder each time. But I was getting nervous about it because this is how I make my livelihood. This is what I do. I talk. What would happen if I lost my voice? Now, I know that'd be great for most of you, my wife and everybody else, but you know, it's like a concert pianist losing the use of his hands, right? And I was really nervous about this possibility that I might be losing my voice. And week after week, it wasn't getting better. It was getting worse to the point where I realized I probably wasn't going to be able to preach anymore. Finally, I got a doctor's appointment with an ENT, ear, nose, and throat guy. And so I was pretty happy that he was going to look at it and examine me. So, true story. So we're sitting there in his office. He's got his computer screen facing so I can see it as well, and he's typing things in while he's interviewing me. And so one of the things he types in the notes, he wrote this. He wrote, "No SOB." And so I said to him, "Well, I'm glad you don't think I'm an SOB." He says, "What?" I said, "You just wrote on there that I'm not an SOB." He says, "That means no shortness of breath." What do you think it meant? I said, "Oh, yeah, I kind of thought that's what it meant." And so he starts examining me. And he says, "You know, there's no doubt that your vocal cords are swollen." But he says, "My bigger concern is you've got a lot of trash on the back of your tongue." I'm thinking, trash in the back of my tongue, like bottle caps and cigarette butts? I said, how'd the trash get in the back of my tongue? He says, "Well, it gets there from acid reflux." And he says, "I think your real problem is acid reflux. And while you're sleeping, it's coming up and it's depositing this trash on the back of your tongue, and it's affecting how you speak." And so he says, this is what I would like to do. I'd like to give you this prescription drug. So he actually prescribes a drug called a proton pump inhibitor. And so, I mean, I didn't know I had a proton pump, did you? I thought, what, am I a cyborg or something? I've got a proton pump, and it needs to be slowed down or inhibited in some way? And so I said, "What's this going to do?" And he says, "Well, it's going to control the acid reflux." I said, "Can't you give me like Tums?" And he says, No, I think the better way, the long-term solve of this problem is to give you a proton pump inhibitor. So I said to him, "Well, how long do I have to be on these medications?" And he said, "Well, judging from what I'm seeing, probably for the rest of your life." So anyway, I brought them with me. So I go down to the store, and I pick up, look at how stinking big this thing is. Look at the thing of pills that he prescribes. And I bring them home, and I sit them on the table, and I'm looking at them, and I'm thinking, I don't know if I like the prospect of spending the rest of my life popping these great big huge pills so that I can slow down the RPMs of my proton pump. Right? I mean, if it's an inhibitor, I mean, I'm imagining this pump spinning away, and I got to slow it down or stop it. And then I'm thinking, I don't even know what a proton pump is. Do you? So I went and looked it up. You know, you can look these things up on Google. And so this is what the proton pump does. It actually transports the protons from the matrix mitochondria to the intermembrane space. Right? No, I have no idea what that means. But it sounded important. I thought, if I start taking these, how are the protons, how are they going to get from the matrix mitochondria to the intermembrane space? How are they going to get there if I slow down or stop this pump? And so I'm like kind of bugged by this whole thing. And I'm thinking, maybe there's another cause. Maybe this acid reflux, going out on a limb here, maybe it has something to do with that big plate of nachos I eat every night before I go to bed. I don't know. Maybe I could cut that out. Nah, it's a bad thought. So then I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get a second opinion. And so I called my daughter. And I said, I need your opinion. Oh, there's a reason for it. My daughter's a speech language pathologist. And so I had my daughter give me an examination, and she said, you're messed up. And I said, I know there's something wrong. I said, I need your professional opinion. She says, you talk too much. I said, no, I want your professional opinion. She says, that's my professional opinion, Pop. You talk too much. You never stop talking. You talk from the time you wake up till the time you go to bed. You're wearing the thing out. I'm thinking, really? I mean, I just don't need a pill? She says, no, you're wearing your vocal cords out. You can't. And it is true. I mean, this is what I do. And I said, well, what do you think I should do? She said, honestly, you got to rest. You got to rest your vocal cords. You got to take time off preaching. You got to take time off talking. And so then I thought, okay, I can do that. So I went on holidays, and I thought, I haven't taken one of these pills, by the way. I've never taken one. And so I said, I'm going to try this. And so I said, Kathy, we're going to go on holidays, but we can't talk. So you need to, I'm wondering if you can do this. Can you give me the silent treatment for 3 weeks? She said, with my hand tied behind my back. She once went 3 years, right? So, I mean, this was going to be nothing for her. So here's the problem. So we go on holidays. She's not talking to me because she knows she's not allowed to. Turns out I talk to myself. I mean, I don't ever shut up. I mean, at least I'm talking to someone interesting. I get that. But I just don't shut up. And it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. So I left those things on the shelf. I stopped talking for 3 weeks. And after 3 weeks, my voice came back full measure. Here's what the big revelation was for me. I mean, when he started talking about my proton pump not working properly, I'm thinking, really? Is that really what's wrong with me? And I went to the Word of God, because you shall abide in the truth, and the Word, and the truth will set you free. So I went to the Word of God, and I'm reading there where it says that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. And I thought, if God gave me a proton pump, I don't know where it is, don't really know what exactly it does, but he probably had a reason for it. Maybe I shouldn't be slowing it down by putting some pills in my mouth that I don't really know what they're doing. And see, here's what I understand. The reason why our body doesn't function as well as it should is because most of us aren't taking good care of it. Right? And 90%, I bet, and I'm not slagging doctors or medicine or pharmaceuticals here. Thank God for them. They save lives and help all of us. I understand that. But do we really want to be dependent when what we really need to do is make some good lifestyle choices and start exercising and start dieting and start living without the sin that afflicts us so often in our lives? And if you begin to take those things out of your life that are unhelpful, that our world says, it's a free world, you can do whatever you want. And that's why so many people are sick, because they think that it's a free world and they can do what they want, and they just need to go to the doctor and say, I don't want to do what I need to do, so just give me a little white pill. And there we go, and we end up in this bondage. And see, Jesus said that anyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. And I don't want to be a slave to anything in this world, because my Jesus came into this world and he said the truth shall set you free, and he who the Son sets free is free indeed. All right. Let's stand together, shall we? I want to ask you to do something while the worship team's coming up. I want to ask you to all close your eyes and bow your heads for a moment. This is going to be different than you think where I'm going here. And I want you to be really honest with yourself here for a moment. How many, nobody looking around, every eye closed. How many of you in this room today that if you're really honest, there is an area of your life that is really a form of bondage of some sort? Maybe one of the things I talked about, and I talked about a bunch of things today, but there is an area of your life that you really actually aren't free in, and you'd love to get free. Let me see your hands. How many have at least one area of your life? Not every hand went up, but I think most of us have something in our life. Just hold your hand up for a moment. By holding that hand up, you're saying this. You're saying, Lord, I want to be free in this. If Jesus came to set the captives free, then he came to set you free from whatever that thing is in your life, whatever it is. And that's what this series is all about, getting to that place where we can really find true freedom. And so I want to pray for you, and then when we pray, we're going to go into this song, and I want you to take this thing, whatever it is, And I want you to cast it at the foot of the cross. Figuratively speaking, you just lay it before Jesus and get free from it. Lord, I just pray for all these people that have admitted today that there's some form of bondage and slavery in their life. And Lord, I know in reality it's probably all of us. And so I pray for each person here today that you would help us to get free, that you would help us to get to that place where we would know what it means to walk in true freedom, free from the scourges and the lies and the sins of this world, and instead in the freedom that comes only in Christ. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Let me just give you one more little tip about getting free. James said, confess your sin one to another. You know why he said that? One of the keys to getting free from something that is a bondage in our life is by telling another human being. And when you tell them, it actually really helps you in the process, because now you're being held accountable to someone else. And I want to encourage you, whatever that thing was that you raised your hand for, I want you to find someone that you can trust, and I want you to go share that with them sometime in the next week. And share that with them and say, this is what you're trying to get free of, and you'll be amazed at how far that goes to helping you get free.